Hello again, beautiful people, and welcome back to Let's Talk. Today, we will be continuing our conversation on fear and anxiety, and as this is our first Friday video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what to expect. Normally, on a Friday video, we would go more in-depth on the topics we introduced on Monday, as well as addressing comments that you may have made on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. However, as this last Monday's video was our first video, and as expected, we didn't have very many comments. I will be just touching on a few more topics that I didn't touch on Monday. As many of you are probably familiar, the word phobia is typically associated with fears. As mentioned in our last video, arachnophobia, ophidiophobia, and acrophobia are the most common fears among adults. However, a phobia is actually classified as an anxiety disorder, and it has kind of an interesting backstory. The word phobia is thought to come from the Greek pantheon, specifically the Greek god Phobos, who was thought to be the god of panic and flight. Phobos actually had a brother, Deimos, who is the Greek god of terror and dread. What's interesting is that Phobos and Deimos are the sons of Ares, the Greek god of war, and Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love. This ties into the understanding of Phobos, a fear of a loss, as well as simply just being afraid. The idea of fear in literature dates as far back as the stories relating to the Greek gods, perhaps even further back. Some more common fears touched on in literature that you may be familiar with: Oscar Wilde's The Portrait of Dorian Gray. And if you're familiar with the story, you know that Dorian Gray is essentially a man who cannot age or cannot get hurt. Instead, all of his pain and everything else gets transferred to a portrait of him that he keeps in the attic until it gets destroyed, and it's a whole bunch of stuff that happens at the end. But generally, the theme there is a fear of death or illness. This is extraordinarily common, not even just in literature. Anyone who has ever been diagnosed with an illness has probably experienced that fear of, is this illness going to kill me? Especially as they get older. And I think more overall, a fear of our own mortality is something that drives a lot of people to do what they do. Another example comes from one of my favorite authors, Edgar Allan Poe. Specifically, in the poem The Raven, there's a fear being expressed of loss or being alone. Now, in the poem, a raven flies into his room late at night. There's a lot more to it than that, but essentially the raven is reminding him of his dead wife. As the poem progresses, he gets more and more incensed by this raven reminding him of his dead wife. This is an anger stemming from his fear, of course. Another more classical example of fear in literature is Homer's The Odyssey, which I've never read, again, because from what I understand it's extremely long and very dry. But apparently, the main theme there is a fear of war or a fear of disaster. It does also tie into a fear of shipwrecks, which were the ancient equivalent to a fear of plane crashes, since most people don't travel by ship anymore. One of the more classical examples in modern times is, of course, Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. The general theme there is a fear of prosecution, or a fear of having your faults being exposed to the general public. In the story, a woman is adorned with a scarlet A for adulteress. There's a lot more to the story, and I encourage you to go read it if you're interested. The last piece of literature that I'm going to discuss is, again, one of my favorites. I've never read the original script of it, but I have read translated or updated shortened versions of the story. If anyone has a link to the original, I would be very interested in that. But it's Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote, which is typically described as a fear of literature not relating to the real world. But a more contemporary view would be to see this as a fear of missing out, or FOMO. The idea here is that when you read in literature of an imaginary, amazing world filled with possibilities and magic, you have that fear that real life won't live up to that expectation, or that you're missing out on all these things that could potentially happen. Of course, none of them could really happen in the real world. But the idea of fear does persist into the modern day and take on new forms. Prior to probably this century, the term FOMO, or fear of missing out, would have been classified much differently. Another more modern fear is the fear of being disconnected, or a fear of not having internet access. Personally, I prefer to have internet access, and I do feel a tad anxious when I'm not connected. But I'm not alone in that for sure. But I think a lot of this fear of being disconnected, this fear of embarrassing yourself in social situations, the fear of being alone or being exposed or having your secrets exposed, it comes from a much more base fear. Long, long ago, when we were wandering the earth in tribes, the fear of being ostracized or banished from that tribe to wander alone almost certainly meant that you were going to die. So having that fear ingrained in us, that fear of needing to be part of a pack or needing to be part of a tribe, is a very primal, very ancient fear that comes with a very strong evolutionary advantage. Of course, if you're being part of a pack, if you get sick, for example, then it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to starve to death or that you're going to dehydrate or anything, because there are other members of the tribe there to look after you. Of course, this fear of being ostracized or fear of being removed from a pack or a tribe has caused more complex issues. Specifically, nowadays, we see this being expressed in terms of homophobia or transphobia, or just more generally in terms of bigotry. And of course, the issue of transphobia has become rather prevalent even this last week with the American president's repeal of protections for transgender individuals, specifically transgender students. The idea of some subgroups of straight men being afraid of homosexuals, which of course they probably won't say that they're afraid, that they're more disgusted or put off by that, that idea comes from the sense that they're not like us. It's a very tribal thing going back. You would form a tribe with people and you have your ideas and your culture and your shared history, and you say, these people are us, they're part of us, but those people over there, they're different than us, they're bad. And again, that's a very primal fear. It's something that I think everyone should work to overcome, of course, because being disclusionary inherently means that you're going to be missing out on certain experiences that you're just not privy to in your everyday life. For example, food. Food is something that all humans must consume, but there are thousands, if not millions, of different recipes out there in the world. But what's really interesting is that if you look across different cultures and you look at their food, you'll see that there are certain variations of the same dish. For example, something that comes from my cultural heritage, pierogies. It's simply, basically it's simply potato and cheese inside of a dough envelope, essentially. It's very similar to lots of other foods that you'll see across the globe. For example, dumplings or samosas. The same general idea is that you have a dough packaging or envelope type of thing with different food stuffed inside. And almost every culture has a variation on this. I'm not going to say that absolutely every culture does, but there are hundreds of variations of pierogies that all essentially relate to the same theme. Now, I don't want to go too much into politics, but I think, as I stated previously, that being more inclusionary is the best choice for humanity. We have the best chance of being able to understand everyone's experience. We have the best array of different experiences and different knowledge bases to choose from if we choose to include other people. Just because someone else might be different from you doesn't mean that what they have to say or the knowledge that they have is automatically invalid. In fact, in most cases, you'll find that someone who has a completely different experience from you will have not only a different perspective, but a completely different knowledge base. And that can help you enormously in understanding things in your own life. And as I touched on a little bit before, more generally, there's a fear basis for bigotry as well. It stems from, hey, you don't look like me, or hey, you don't sound like me. It goes back to that tribal sense of these people are different than I am. And not only has bigotry been used to segregate people, but also people have used each other's beliefs to segregate others as well. Now again, I'm not going to say specifically, that religion is bad, or that pantheon is bad, or that set of beliefs is bad. I personally don't subscribe to any of them, but I am, of course, inclusionary. I would like to hear other people's opinions or other people's thoughts, provided that they aren't being bigoted or discriminatory in any way. Looking back to the past, there are many, many examples of beliefs being used as a basis for discrimination. You know, historically we had the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition, and even the Salem witch trials. And nowadays, the most common example, in the States anyway, is Islamophobia. Now, again, I cannot stress enough how much I think that being inclusionary is the best course of action for humans. But if someone were willing to have an intelligent discussion about why they felt, you know, certain groups should be excluded, I would be interested in hearing their opinion. I wouldn't agree with that opinion, but I would be interested in hearing that opinion, just to broaden my own knowledge base. But again, I think this all ties back into a fear of being ostracized. If you're in a community or a society that, you know, is saying, those people are wrong, and you're sitting there going, well, no, but I don't think they're wrong, then inherently you have the possibility of everyone else saying, well, he doesn't think that they're wrong, or she doesn't think that they're wrong, or they don't think that they're wrong, so clearly, you know, they're probably part of that other group and we should treat them the same. Just because someone has the belief that others aren't inherently wrong for what they believe or who they are or what they are, doesn't necessarily mean that they deserve to be ostracized. These people should work harder within their communities to spread that tolerance and acceptance. But again, that's just my opinion. And more generally, going forward through all of our videos, you have to understand that what I'm saying is based on, of course, some research. I didn't know about Deimos and Phobos before this video, and I find that extremely interesting because mythology has always been somewhat of a hobby of mine, but a lot of it is just my opinion or my interpretation of the research that I've done. It's not to be taken as this is exactly how the world is, or this is exactly how the world should be. It's just my opinion. But I thank you for taking the time to, you know, hear me out or hear my opinion and watch this video. If you like this video, please feel free to press the like button. If you would like to see more content from this channel, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe. And if you have any comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, on our Facebook page, or tweet me on Twitter. And join us next Monday when our conversation topic will be owls. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day. I completely lost my train of thought.